In the year 1513, a man sat alone in a small farmhouse outside Florence, stripped of his title, tortured for a crime he did not commit, and exiled from the only city he had ever loved. He was broke. He was humiliated. He was, by every measure society uses to judge a man, finished. And in that silence, in that ruin, he picked up a pen and wrote the most dangerous book about human nature ever put on paper. Not dangerous because it was violent, dangerous because it was true. He looked at the world not as it should be, but as it actually is, and what he saw terrified the people in power so much that his name became a curse whispered in palaces for the next 500 years. His name was Niccolò Machiavelli, and today, in the next few minutes, you are going to learn the exact principles that this broken, exiled, humiliated man used to understand power, influence, and survival so completely that kings and presidents still study him in secret. Because here is what nobody tells you about your comfortable, average, forgettable life. You were taught to be good. You were taught to be nice. You were taught to wait your turn, trust the system, and believe that if you simply work hard and stay kind, the world will reward you. And somewhere deep inside, you already know that is a lie. You have watched cruel people win. You have watched dishonest people rise. You have watched the loudest, boldest, most calculating people in the room take everything while you stood quietly in the corner, being good. This video is not going to comfort you. It is going to arm you. By the end of it, the soft, naive version of you that believes the world runs on fairness will be gone. In its place will stand someone who understands the real rules of power, the real rules of influence, and the real rules of survival. This is Machiavelli, and this video will end your average life forever. Welcome back to The Hidden Mind, the channel where we strip away the comfortable lies you were raised on and hand you the cold, uncomfortable truths that actually shape the world. If this is your first time here, understand what this channel is. We do not deal in motivational fluff. We do not deal in empty affirmations that dissolve the moment life gets hard. We deal in the psychology of power, the philosophy of the ruthless, and the timeless strategies used by the men and women who actually changed history, not the ones who simply wished they could. Today we are diving deep into the mind of Niccolò Machiavelli, the Florentine philosopher whose name has become synonymous with cunning, strategy, and the uncomfortable truth about how power really works. This is not a history lecture. This is a survival manual, disguised as a biography. Every single principle in this video can be applied to your career, your relationships, your finances, and your sense of self, starting today. But before we go further, I need something from you. This channel survives because of people like you, people who are done sleepwalking through life and ready to see things as they truly are. If that is you, hit that like button right now. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm that this knowledge deserves to reach more people who desperately need it. If you have not subscribed yet, do it now, and turn on notifications, because we release content like this regularly, and you do not want to miss the moment your entire worldview gets rebuilt from the ground up. Drop a comment below and tell me where you are watching this from and what part of your life you are hoping to transform, because I read every single one, and your comment helps this video reach the algorithm faster than almost anything else. If you want to go further and can afford it, this channel also accepts super thanks, and every single contribution goes directly into researching and producing deeper, more dangerous knowledge like this for you. And if this video moves you even a little, please share it. Send it to the one person in your life who is still playing by rules that were designed to keep them small. Now let us begin, because what you are about to hear is not comfortable. It is necessary. Part 1. The man they tried to erase. To understand why Machiavelli's ideas still terrify people in power 5 centuries later, you have to understand the man himself, because his philosophy was not born in a university lecture hall, surrounded by theory. It was forged in blood, betrayal, and personal catastrophe. Niccolò Machiavelli was born in 1469 in Florence, a city that, at the time, was less a peaceful cultural capital and more a viper pit of shifting alliances, assassination plots, foreign invasions, and constant political upheaval. This was not a safe place to grow up. This was a place where popes hired mercenary armies, where powerful families poisoned their rivals at dinner parties, and where entire governments could collapse overnight because one nobleman insulted another at the wrong moment. Machiavelli did not grow up sheltered from this reality. He grew up inside it. He rose through the ranks of Florentine government to become a senior diplomat and secretary, a position that placed him face to face with the most powerful and dangerous men in Europe. He negotiated with kings. He studied the tactics of popes. And most importantly, he spent years observing one man in particular whose ruthless efficiency left a permanent mark on his thinking, a warlord and political operator named Cesare Borgia. Machiavelli watched Borgia conquer territory through a terrifying blend of charm, cruelty, deception, and perfectly timed violence. He watched Borgia eliminate his enemies not through slow, agonizing conflict, but through swift, decisive, almost surgical action, and then immediately shift into the role of a generous, beloved ruler the moment the bloodshed was no longer necessary. Machiavelli did not write about this because he admired cruelty. He wrote about it because he recognized something most people refuse to accept, that the world does not reward the purest intentions. It rewards the most effective actions. Then in 1512, everything Machiavelli had built collapsed. The powerful Medici family returned to power in Florence, and Machiavelli, having served the previous government, was accused of conspiracy against them. He was thrown into prison and subjected to a brutal form of torture where his arms were tied behind his back and he was hoisted into the air by a rope, a method designed to dislocate the shoulders and inflict unbearable pain, all to extract a confession for a crime historians still believe he did not commit. He was eventually released, stripped of his position, and exiled to a small farm outside the city, forbidden from participating in the political life that had defined his entire identity. Most men, at that point, would have been destroyed. Machiavelli instead sat down every single evening, changed into the formal robes he used to wear as a diplomat, symbolically stepping back into the world of power even though he had been cast out of it, and wrote. Out of that exile came The Prince, a short, brutal, unsentimental guide to gaining and keeping power, and later, The Discourses on Livy, a deeper exploration of what makes republics rise and fall. These books were not written to please anyone. They were written by a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to protect except the truth as he understood it. That is why his words still cut so deep today. He was not trying to sound wise. He was trying to survive, and in doing so, he described the actual mechanics of power more honestly than almost anyone before or since. Now, let us take those mechanics and turn them into a weapon you can use in your own life, starting with the first and most brutal truth he ever wrote. Lesson 1. The world does not reward the good, it rewards the effective. Somewhere in your childhood, someone sat you down and told you that if you are honest, kind, patient, and hardworking, life will eventually reward you. It is one of the most comforting lies ever told, and it is also one of the most damaging, because it sets you up for a lifetime of confusion every time you watch someone dishonest, selfish, or ruthless get promoted over you, get chosen over you, get loved over you. Machiavelli's most controversial and most misunderstood idea is this: a leader, and by extension, any person trying to succeed in the real world, should be judged not by how virtuous their intentions are, but by how effective their actions turn out to be. He did not say that morality is meaningless. He said something far more uncomfortable, that in a world full of people who are not virtuous, a person who insists on being perfectly good all the time, no matter the cost, will eventually be destroyed by those who are not. Think about how many times in your own life you have chosen the right thing to do, the polite thing, the fair thing, the patient thing, and watched someone else, someone louder, someone more willing to bend the rules, take the opportunity that should have been yours. That is not bad luck. That is the world operating exactly the way Machiavelli described it 500 years ago. This does not mean you should become cruel or dishonest as a lifestyle. What it means is that you must stop being naive about how outcomes are actually decided. Effectiveness is not the enemy of goodness. Ineffectiveness, disguised as goodness, is simply weakness wearing a nicer costume. A doctor who is too gentle to deliver a hard diagnosis is not being kind. They are failing their patient. A parent who is too soft to discipline a child is not being loving. They are failing that child's future. A business person who refuses to negotiate firmly because they want to be liked is not being ethical. They are simply losing. Machiavelli forces you to ask a question most people spend their entire lives avoiding. What actually works? Not what feels virtuous in the moment. Not what will make people speak well of you at a dinner party. What actually produces the result you need. This single shift in thinking from "what is the nicest way to handle this" to "what is the most effective way to handle this" while still holding on to my core principles is the first step toward ending the average, passive, reactive life you have been living. Average people optimize for how they are perceived in the short term. Powerful people optimize for the outcome they actually need. From this moment forward, before you make a decision, whether it is confronting a coworker, setting a boundary with a family member, or negotiating your salary, ask yourself Machiavelli's real question. Not "what would a good person do here," but what action actually solves this problem. Sometimes the answer will align perfectly with kindness, but when it does not, you now have permission to choose effectiveness, because the world was never grading you on intentions. It was always grading you on results. Lesson 2. Appearance is currency. Here is a sentence that will permanently change how you see every single person you interact with for the rest of your life. People do not respond to who you actually are. They respond to who they perceive you to be. Machiavelli understood this with a clarity that still makes modern psychologists uncomfortable. He wrote that a ruler does not necessarily need to possess virtues like honesty, mercy, and integrity, but they absolutely need to appear to possess them, because the vast majority of people judge by sight and by outcome, not by deep investigation into your true character. Think about how insulting that sounds at first. And then think about how true it actually is. When you meet someone new, do you conduct a thorough investigation into their private thoughts, their hidden motivations, their true history? Of course not. You judge them by how they carry themselves, how they speak, how they dress, how confidently they shake your hand, how they are talked about by others. You are building an entire assessment of their character based on surface-level signals, and so is everyone else, including the people judging you right now, in your career, in your relationships, in every room you walk into. This is not a flaw in human nature that you can complain your way out of. It is a permanent feature of how human beings process the world, because we simply do not have the time or the access to verify everyone's true inner character before deciding how to treat them. Once you accept this, an enormous amount of power becomes available to you. The people who seem to effortlessly command respect in meetings, who seem to instantly earn trust, who seem to walk into any room and immediately become the person everyone listens to, are not necessarily more competent or more trustworthy than you. In many cases, they have simply mastered the art of managing perception. They understand that confidence is often read as competence, even when the underlying skill is still developing. They understand that calm body language is read as control, even in moments of internal panic. They understand that consistency in how you present yourself builds a reputation that starts working for you even when you are not in the room. This is not about becoming fake. It is about recognizing that the version of you that shows up matters just as much as the substance behind it. And if you neglect that presentation, you are handing away power for no reason. Think about the areas of your life where you have been so focused on just being yourself that you have failed to consider how that self is actually landing on other people. The way you dress for an important meeting, the way you carry your body when you walk into a room full of strangers, the tone you use when you ask for something you want, the confidence in your voice when you state your own opinion instead of hedging it into nothing. None of these things require you to lie about who you are. They simply require you to stop being careless about how you are perceived, because right now, someone somewhere is making a decision about your future, your promotion, your relationship, your opportunity, based entirely on the impression you left behind, whether or not that impression was an accurate reflection of your true worth. Machiavelli's lesson here is brutal, but liberating. Stop assuming the world will eventually see your true value if you simply wait long enough. Start actively shaping the perception that opens the doors your true value deserves. Lesson 3. Better to be feared than loved, when you cannot have both. This is the single most famous and most misquoted idea Machiavelli ever wrote. So let us be precise about what he actually said, because the popular version of this quote has been twisted into something far more brutal than his actual argument. Machiavelli wrote that it would be ideal for a leader to be both loved and feared at the same time. But since achieving both perfectly is extremely difficult, and since human loyalty, based purely on love, tends to be fragile and self-interested, if a person is forced to choose one over the other, it is safer to be feared than loved, because fear is something you control, and love is something that depends entirely on the goodwill of others, goodwill that can vanish the instant it becomes inconvenient for them to keep giving it to you. Translate this into your everyday life, and the lesson becomes almost uncomfortably clear. Have you ever been the nice one in a friend group, a workplace, or a family? The person everyone likes, but also the person whose boundaries get walked over the moment they become inconvenient. That is love without respect, and Machiavelli would tell you it is one of the weakest positions a person can occupy, because it means your value in that relationship is conditional on you continuing to make everyone comfortable. The moment you say no, the moment you set a boundary, the moment you stop being endlessly agreeable, you discover exactly how conditional that love really was. Now think about the people in your life who are respected, even slightly feared, in the sense that people do not walk over them, people think twice before disrespecting them, people take their boundaries seriously. That is not because those people are cruel, it is because they have made it clear, through their actions and their consistency, that there are real consequences to mistreating them. This is the version of fear Machiavelli was actually describing, not terror, not abuse, but a form of respect, rooted in the understanding that you will not simply absorb mistreatment to keep the peace. In practical terms, this means learning to say no without over-explaining yourself into an apology. It means learning to hold a boundary, even when the other person is upset about it. It means understanding that being universally liked is not actually a position of strength. It is often a position of vulnerability, because people who need to be loved by everyone will avoid necessary conflict, avoid necessary confrontation, and avoid necessary decisions, all to protect a version of likability that was never guaranteeing their safety in the first place. Machiavelli is not telling you to become cruel or intimidating for its own sake. He is telling you to stop being so desperate for approval that you allow people to treat you however they want. Respect, built on healthy boundaries, will always outlast affection built on constant appeasement, because the moment you stop appeasing, the affection disappears. But respect, once earned through consistency and self-respect, tends to remain. The average person spends their entire life terrified of being disliked. The person who ends that average life understands that being slightly feared, in the sense of being taken seriously, is a far more durable foundation than being endlessly, conditionally loved. Lesson 4. Virtue and fortuna. Seize the moment before it seizes you. Machiavelli built much of his philosophy around the tension between two Italian concepts, virtue and fortuna. Fortuna represents luck, chance, circumstance, the random, unpredictable forces of life that none of us can fully control. The market crashing, an unexpected illness, being born into a certain family, meeting the right person at exactly the right time. Virtue, on the other hand, represents skill, boldness, decisive action, and the sheer will to act, even when the outcome is uncertain. Machiavelli famously compared fortuna to a violent river that floods the plains, destroying everything in its path when it is left unchecked, but which can be tamed and redirected by a person who builds strong defenses and takes decisive action before the flood arrives, rather than waiting passively to see what happens. He believed that roughly half of what happens to a person in life is shaped by chance and circumstance, forces entirely outside their control. But the other half, he insisted, is shaped by virtue, by the courage to act decisively in the moments that matter, rather than freezing, hesitating, or waiting for permission. Here is where this becomes deeply personal for you. How many opportunities in your life have quietly disappeared because you hesitated? How many times did you have a clear, gut-level instinct to speak up, to apply, to reach out, to take the leap, and instead you waited, told yourself you would do it later, told yourself you needed more information, more confidence, more certainty, and by the time you finally worked up the nerve, the window had already closed. Machiavelli would tell you that this hesitation is not humility, it is not patience, it is often simply fear disguised as caution, and it is one of the most reliable ways to guarantee an average, unremarkable life. He famously wrote that fortune favors the bold over the cautious, using the harsh metaphor that fortune, like a force that must be confronted rather than politely negotiated with, tends to yield to those who approach it with confidence and decisive energy rather than timid, hesitant half measures. This is not a call to be reckless. Machiavelli was, if anything, obsessed with preparation, with studying history, with understanding your circumstances deeply before acting. But once you have done that preparation, once the moment to act actually arrives, he is absolutely clear that hesitation is your enemy. The people who build empires, who build companies, who build extraordinary relationships and extraordinary careers are rarely the most naturally talented people in the room. They are the people who were willing to act while everyone else was still waiting for a sign, still waiting to feel ready, still waiting for fortune to hand them permission. Fortune does not hand out permission, it rewards the people who take it. Starting today, you have to develop a personal relationship with decisive action. When an opportunity presents itself and your preparation is reasonably solid, the goal is no longer to wait until you feel completely certain, because that certainty rarely arrives before the window closes. The goal is to act with calculated boldness, to treat hesitation as the actual risk, rather than treating action as the risk. Every day you spend waiting for the perfect moment is a day fortune spends deciding it will simply move on without you. Lesson 5. The Fox and the Lion. Adapt or be destroyed. One of the most powerful images Machiavelli ever created was his description of the two animals a truly effective person must learn to embody, the lion and the fox. The lion is strong, powerful, and intimidating, but the lion cannot see or avoid the traps that are set for it. The fox, on the other hand, is cunning enough to recognize traps and avoid them, but is far too weak to fend off wolves and genuine threats through strength alone. Machiavelli's conclusion was simple and brutally practical. You must learn to be both. You need the strength of the lion to protect yourself from direct threats, and the cunning of the fox to recognize the hidden traps, manipulations, and dangers that strength alone cannot see coming. Translate this into your life, and you will realize how many people fail because they only ever develop one half of this equation. Some people are all lion. They are strong, aggressive, confident, willing to confront problems head-on, but they are completely blind to subtlety, to the political undercurrents in their workplace, to the quiet manipulations happening around them, to the reality that not every problem can be solved by force or sheer willpower. They charge directly into traps because they never learn to see them coming, and their strength, ironically, becomes the very thing that gets them destroyed, because they trusted it to solve every situation, even the ones that required patience, subtlety, and careful observation instead. Other people are all fox. They are clever, perceptive, excellent at reading a room, excellent at avoiding conflict and spotting hidden agendas, but they are so conflict-averse, so unwilling to ever assert themselves directly, that they get walked over by anyone willing to apply real pressure. They see the trap coming from a mile away and then freeze, because they never develop the raw strength or the willingness to confront a direct threat when subtlety was no longer enough. Neither version of this person survives and thrives long-term. What Machiavelli is really teaching you is the art of adaptability, the refusal to be a one-dimensional person operating with a single fixed strategy in a world that is constantly shifting. Some situations in your life require lion energy, direct confrontation, clear boundaries, unmistakable strength. If someone is disrespecting you openly, hesitating and trying to be clever about it will only embolden them further. That moment calls for the lion. Other situations require fox energy, patience, careful reading of the political landscape, understanding what is actually happening beneath the surface of a conversation before you react. If you charge in with pure aggression when the situation actually calls for patience and observation, you will walk directly into a trap that a more perceptive version of you would have easily avoided. The average person defaults to whichever strategy feels most natural to their personality and applies it to every situation, regardless of whether it actually fits. The person who ends their average life learns to read the terrain first and then consciously chooses which version of themselves the moment requires. This is not about being fake or manipulative. It is about developing genuine range so that you are never caught helpless because your only tool was a hammer and the situation actually required a scalpel, or the other way around. Lesson 6. Never depend entirely on the arms of others. Machiavelli spent an enormous amount of time in his writing warning against a specific and extremely common mistake, relying on mercenary or borrowed strength instead of building your own. In his historical context, he was talking about rulers who hired foreign mercenary armies to defend their territory instead of training and arming their own citizens. He observed over and over again that this strategy tended to fail catastrophically because mercenaries fight for money, not loyalty, and the moment a better offer comes along, or the moment real danger appears, that borrowed strength has every incentive to abandon you or even turn against you. He argued that any power built on forces you do not truly control is an illusion of power, fragile and temporary, no matter how strong it looks from the outside. Now apply this directly to your own life. How much of your current stability, your current sense of security, is actually built on things you do not control? A single employer who could lay you off tomorrow with no warning. A single relationship that could end, leaving your entire emotional support system gone overnight. A single skill set that could become obsolete the moment the industry shifts. A reputation that exists entirely in the hands of other people's opinions, which can turn on a single rumor or a single bad day. Machiavelli would look at that kind of life and immediately identify it as dangerously fragile, not because any of those things are inherently bad to have, but because none of them are truly, fully within your control. And a life built entirely on things outside your control is a life one bad event away from collapse. The alternative he pushed for, obsessively, was the development of your own strength, your own citizen army, so to speak. In modern terms, this means developing skills that belong entirely to you and cannot be taken away by a single employer, a single client, or a single circumstance. It means building multiple streams of value in your life, financial, relational, and skill-based, so that no single failure can bring the entire structure down. It means investing in your own capability rather than outsourcing your entire sense of security to a company, a person, or a system that owes you nothing beyond the terms of whatever arrangement currently exists between you. This is one of the most practical and immediately actionable lessons in Machiavelli's entire philosophy. Look honestly at your life right now and ask yourself which parts of your stability are borrowed, dependent on someone else's continued goodwill, someone else's continued employment of you, someone else's continued presence in your life, and which parts are genuinely, permanently yours: skills, knowledge, character, financial independence, physical health. Every hour you spend building the second category is an hour spent making yourself less vulnerable to the collapse of the first. The average person builds their entire identity and security around borrowed arms and hopes the mercenaries never leave. The person who ends their average life understands that true security only ever comes from strength that belongs to them alone. Lesson 7. Cut deep, cut once. The cost of half measures. There is a passage in Machiavelli's writing that is genuinely disturbing on the surface, where he argues that when harm must be done to someone, it should be done all at once, decisively, rather than drawn out slowly over time. He was speaking in the brutal, literal political context of conquest, where a ruler taking over new territory had to decide how to deal with the previous power structure, but strip away the historical violence of the example, and underneath it lies one of the most useful psychological principles you will ever learn about decision-making. Half measures create more pain than decisive action because they draw out the suffering, keep the wound open, and give the damage time to compound and metastasize without ever actually resolving the underlying problem. Think about every time in your life you knew, deep down, that a relationship needed to end, but instead of ending it cleanly, you dragged it out for months or even years, having the same argument over and over, hurting yourself and the other person slowly, instead of confronting the truth quickly and decisively. Think about every job you knew was wrong for you, every toxic friendship you knew was draining you, every unhealthy habit you knew was holding you back, where instead of making a clean, decisive break, you allowed it to linger, to bleed you slowly, convincing yourself that the gradual, hesitant approach was somehow kinder or safer than simply confronting the problem directly. Machiavelli's insight is that this instinct, the instinct to soften difficult decisions by dragging them out, usually backfires. It does not reduce the total amount of pain involved, it simply spreads that pain out over a much longer period of time, and in doing so, it often increases the total damage done, because prolonged uncertainty and prolonged conflict tend to be more corrosive than a single, sharp, decisive resolution. This does not mean you should be reckless or cruel in how you handle difficult decisions. It means that once you have determined a decision genuinely needs to be made, whether that is ending a relationship, leaving a job, cutting off a toxic family member, or confronting a serious problem in your life, the kindest and most effective path forward is usually to act decisively rather than to let the situation limp along in a painful, unresolved state indefinitely. Average people avoid difficult decisions because the decision itself feels painful in the moment, so they choose the illusion of comfort that comes from delay, without recognizing that the delay itself is a decision, and usually a far more costly one than the difficult action they were trying to avoid. The person who ends their average life learns to recognize the specific, sharp discomfort of a necessary decision and chooses to move through it quickly and completely, rather than allowing that discomfort to spread out and poison months or years of their life through avoidance. Ask yourself right now, what decision have you been dragging out because the decisive version of it feels too harsh? And what is that delay actually costing you every single day it continues? Lesson 8. Beware the flatterer. Protect the truth tellers. Machiavelli wrote extensively about one of the most dangerous threats to any person in a position of influence: the flatterer, the person who tells you exactly what you want to hear instead of what you actually need to hear, because flattery is easy, comfortable, and immediately rewarding, while honest, critical feedback is uncomfortable and often unwelcome in the moment. He warned that courts throughout history had been destroyed not by external enemies, but by rulers who surrounded themselves with people too afraid or too self-interested to tell them the truth, until the ruler's decisions became so disconnected from reality that collapse became inevitable. He argued that a wise leader must deliberately seek out a small number of people who are given explicit permission to speak honestly, even when that honesty is unwelcome, because the alternative, an environment of constant agreement and praise, is a slow poison that eventually destroys the ability to make good decisions at all. Look honestly at the people you currently surround yourself with. How many of them tell you what you actually need to hear, and how many of them simply tell you what keeps the peace, what keeps you comfortable, what keeps the relationship easy? It feels good in the moment to be surrounded by people who agree with everything you say, who validate every decision, who never challenge your assumptions or point out your blind spots. But Machiavelli would tell you that this comfort is exactly how people end up making the same mistakes over and over again, surrounded by people too polite or too self-interested to ever point it out. This applies just as much to your personal life as it did to Renaissance courts. The friend who tells you honestly that you are settling for less than you deserve in a relationship is more valuable to your long-term well-being than the friend who simply agrees with every decision you make to avoid an uncomfortable conversation. The mentor who bluntly tells you that your business plan has a fatal flaw is doing you a far greater service than the one who tells you everything sounds great because they do not want to discourage you. The hard part of this lesson is recognizing that flattery does not always come from malicious people. Often, it comes from people who genuinely love you but are too afraid of conflict, too afraid of hurting your feelings, to tell you the truth you actually need. Machiavelli's advice here is twofold, and both halves matter equally. First, deliberately identify and protect the honest voices in your life. The people who will tell you an uncomfortable truth, even when it is easier to stay silent, because those voices are rare and extraordinarily valuable, and most people accidentally push them away because honesty is uncomfortable to hear. Second, become deeply suspicious of constant praise and agreement, especially from people who benefit from keeping you comfortable, complacent, or unchallenged. The average person surrounds themselves with an echo chamber that feels wonderful and slowly destroys their judgment. The person who ends their average life deliberately keeps at least one or two voices close who are willing to tell them exactly what they do not want to hear, and treats that discomfort as one of the most valuable things they own. Lesson 9. Build the fortress before the storm arrives. One of Machiavelli's most repeated warnings throughout his writing is directed at rulers who wait until a crisis is already unfolding to begin preparing for it. He observed, through decades of watching Italian city-states rise and collapse, that the leaders who survived were almost never the ones who reacted brilliantly in the moment of crisis. They were the ones who had quietly, patiently done the unglamorous work of preparation long before the crisis ever arrived, building alliances, strengthening defenses, developing contingencies, while everything still appeared calm and stable on the surface. He argued that by the time danger is fully visible to everyone, it is often already too late to prepare an adequate defense, because real preparation takes time, and crises, by their very nature, do not wait for you to be ready. This is one of the most quietly devastating lessons in his entire body of work, because it exposes exactly why so many people's lives fall apart the moment something goes wrong. They were never actually stable. They were simply lucky, for a while, and mistook the absence of crisis for the presence of security. Think about your own financial life. Do you have savings set aside specifically because you know, statistically, That unexpected expenses and emergencies are simply a part of life? Or are you relying on the hope that nothing bad will happen before your next paycheck arrives? Think about your health. Are you building habits now, while you still feel young and resilient, that will protect you decades from now? Or are you assuming your body will simply continue functioning well, regardless of how you treat it today? Think about your relationships. Are you investing time and effort into your closest connections now, while things feel stable? Or are you waiting until a crisis, a health scare, a falling out, a moment of desperate need, to discover whether those relationships are actually as strong as you assumed? Machiavelli's core insight is that the calm periods of your life are not empty time to be passively enjoyed without thought for the future. They are the only time you actually have to prepare for the storms that are, without question, coming eventually. Because no life, no matter how fortunate, avoids every crisis indefinitely. The average person treats stability as a permanent state and only begins preparing once the crisis has already arrived, at which point their options are limited, their choices are desperate, and they are forced to make decisions under pressure that a prepared version of themselves would have made calmly, months or years in advance. The person who ends their average life treats every stable, calm period as valuable preparation time, not because they are pessimistic or living in constant fear, but because they understand, clearly and without illusion, that fortune is unpredictable, and the only real defense against unpredictability is deliberate, unglamorous preparation, done quietly, long before anyone else even suspects it might be necessary. Lesson 10. The ends, the means, and the life you actually want. We have to address the phrase most people associate with Machiavelli more than any other, even though he never actually wrote it in those exact words, the idea that the ends justify the means. What Machiavelli actually argued was more nuanced and in many ways more useful than the crude version of this idea that has survived in popular culture. He suggested that the outcome of an action, particularly in matters of survival, leadership, and the protection of something genuinely important, carries enormous weight in how that action should be judged, especially when the alternative is catastrophic failure. This is not a blank check for cruelty or dishonesty in every area of life. It is a challenge to a specific kind of paralysis that keeps average people stuck, the tendency to become so obsessed with whether an action looks perfectly virtuous by conventional standards that they never actually take the action needed to achieve the outcome that genuinely matters. Think about how often you have avoided doing something uncomfortable, negotiating aggressively for a salary you deserve, ending a relationship that was quietly destroying you, setting a boundary that would upset someone, walking away from an opportunity that looked good on paper but felt wrong in your gut, because taking that action did not feel like the nice thing to do, even though you knew, deep down, that it was the necessary thing to do. This is where Machiavelli's philosophy becomes less about abandoning your values and more about clarifying what your actual priorities are. He is asking you a question most people never consciously answer. What result do you actually need in this situation? And are you willing to take the uncomfortable action required to get it? Or are you going to let the discomfort of the means stop you from ever reaching the end you claim to want? This lesson requires honesty with yourself about what genuinely matters to you. If your actual priority is being liked by everyone in every moment, then yes, you will need to sacrifice a great deal of effectiveness to protect that priority. Because effectiveness often requires uncomfortable, unpopular action. But if your actual priority is building a life of genuine security, genuine respect, and genuine fulfillment, you have to be willing to accept that some of the actions required to get there will not always look pleasant from the outside. And that is not a moral failure. It is simply the honest cost of taking your own goals seriously instead of performing goals you do not actually have the will to pursue. The average person claims to want extraordinary results while only being willing to take conventional, comfortable, universally approved actions to get there, and then wonders why their results remain average. The person who ends their average life gets brutally honest about what they actually want and becomes willing to take the necessary, sometimes uncomfortable, always deliberate action required to build it, without needing external validation for every single step along the way. Bringing it together, the Machiavellian life starting today. Let us pull every single one of these lessons together into something you can actually carry with you the moment this video ends, because knowledge that stays theoretical is knowledge that changes nothing. You now understand that the world rewards effectiveness far more consistently than it rewards good intentions. And that means it is time to stop measuring your worth by how well-meaning you were and start measuring it by what you actually accomplished. You now understand that perception is not a shallow distraction from your true value. It is the doorway through which your true value gets access to opportunity in the first place. And it is time to stop being careless about how you present yourself to the world. You now understand that being universally loved is a far more fragile position than being genuinely respected, and it is time to stop sacrificing your boundaries on the altar of being liked by everyone. You now understand that fortune favors decisive action over endless hesitation, and it is time to stop waiting for a certainty that will never fully arrive before you finally move. You now understand that real strength requires both the lion's boldness and the fox's perception, and it is time to stop relying on a single, rigid strategy for every situation life throws at you. You now understand that borrowed security is an illusion, and it is time to start building skills, resources, and strength that belong entirely to you and cannot be taken away by someone else's decision. You now understand that half measures often cause more damage than decisive action, and it is time to stop dragging out the painful decisions you already know you need to make. You now understand the danger of flattery and the rare value of honest voices, and it is time to audit exactly who you allow closest to your decision-making. You now understand that the calm periods of life are for quiet preparation, not passive comfort, and it is time to start building your defenses before the storm you know, eventually, is coming. And you now understand that clarity about your actual priorities matters more than performing a version of virtue you do not actually have the will to sustain, and it is time to get brutally honest with yourself about what you actually want and what you are willing to do to build it. None of this requires you to become cruel, dishonest, or manipulative as a way of life. Machiavelli himself, in his other major work, The Discourses on Livy, wrote extensively in praise of republics, liberty, and the power of collective virtue when it is genuine and well-structured. He was not a simple villain worshipping cruelty for its own sake. He was a man who refused to lie to himself and to you about how power, influence, and survival actually function in a world that is far less fair and far less forgiving than you were raised to believe. The choice in front of you now is simple and permanent. You can continue living the average version of your life, the one built on the comforting fiction that good intentions alone will eventually be rewarded, waiting patiently for a fairness the world was never designed to guarantee. Or you can take these 10 lessons, forged not in a comfortable classroom, but in exile, torture, betrayal, and the ruthless political chaos of Renaissance Italy, and use them to build a version of yourself that is prepared, decisive, perceptive, self-reliant, and finally, effective. If what you just heard shifted something in how you see the world, I need you to do 4 things before you close this video, and they genuinely matter more than you think. First, hit the like button right now, because it is the single fastest way to tell this platform that this kind of knowledge deserves to reach more people who are exactly where you were 20 minutes ago, sleepwalking through an average life without realizing it. Second, subscribe to The Hidden Mind if you have not already, and make sure notifications are turned on, because we go deeper into philosophies like this every single week. Minds like Sun Tzu, Nietzsche, the Stoics, and other thinkers whose ideas were considered too dangerous, too honest, or too uncomfortable for the mainstream, and you do not want to miss what is coming next. Third, drop a comment below right now before you move on to the next video and tell me which one of these 10 lessons hit you the hardest, because your comment does more than just express your thoughts. It directly tells the algorithm to push this video in front of more people who need to hear it. And I personally read every single comment on this channel. Fourth, if you know someone in your life who is stuck being endlessly agreeable, endlessly hesitant, endlessly waiting for a fairness the world was never built to deliver, share this video with them directly. You might genuinely be the reason their entire trajectory changes. And if this channel has given you something real, something you cannot get from the algorithm-approved motivational content flooding every platform, consider supporting The Hidden Mind through a super thanks. Every single contribution goes directly back into researching, writing, and producing deeper content like this. Content that respects your intelligence enough to tell you the truth instead of another comfortable lie. Machiavelli spent the final years of his life exiled, humiliated, and stripped of everything he had built. And instead of disappearing quietly into that defeat, he wrote words that are still shaping how the powerful understand power 500 years later. You do not need to lose everything to start applying these lessons. You simply need to stop waiting for permission to take them seriously. The average version of you dies the moment you decide to actually use what you just learned, instead of simply nodding along and returning to the same patterns tomorrow. This is The Hidden Mind. I will see you in the next one.